This podcast was produced by OAR Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.
Kia ora koutou, you were listening to Left From Nowhere on Otago Access Radio 105.4 FM 1575 AM. I am your host Tyler West, a member of the Otago Socialist Society, which just so happens to be the sponsor for this show. Today I will be joined by Mark Baxter for a reflection on the student movement in Dunedin over the last 30 to 40-ish years. From his perspective of being involved in the heyday of the 1990s and my own of being around for the more quiet years of the 2010s. If we have time, we'll also reflect on some of the last year's protest activity in Dunedin with a bit of back and forth from the perspectives of a younger and older activist and varyingly active as well, but that will be a maybe if we have time after a hopefully very fruitful discussion about the student movement of years past in this city. Before I introduce today's guest, however, we have the Pacific News. So today we have 3 short stories to cover before moving on to the body of the episode. Our first story is narrowed in on New Caledonia, where the Kanak and Socialist National Liberation Front, the FLNKS, which is the main body of pro-independence organisations, has split with 2 founding parties distancing themselves from the main FLNKS body, one of which having properly split and the other not having officially done so but moving in that direction. Now, the Melanesian Progressive Union, the UPM, based on its French name, has officially pulled out of the coalition after being a member of the FLNKS since its founding in 1984, some 40 years ago. The Party of Kanak Liberation, Palika, based on, again, its French name, has also distanced itself from the Union Caledonienne. However, it hasn't yet committed to leaving the FLNKS. The UPM cites the increasing militancy of the Union Caledonienne and allied parties, especially the Oceanic Democratic Rally, or the RDO, as well as bitter political manoeuvring over the last year, particularly a contested meeting of the FLNKS and its constituent organisations in August. The split marks a significant advancement of the divisions within the movement for independence since riots broke out earlier this year, leaving 13 dead, hundreds injured, and $2+ billion worth of damages. A second story covers a new agreement signed between the governments of the Solomon Islands and China, which exempts ordinary passport holders from visa requirements. The move strengthens already existing ties between the 2 countries, which became part of the fuel for a series of significant riots that broke out in Honiara in late 2021 and continuing under new Prime Minister Jeremiah Manale, the diplomatic policy of his predecessor Manasseh Sogavare. The move is likely to continue the diplomatic tensions between the Solomon Islands and the United States, but especially Australia, as tensions between the US-Australian bloc in the Pacific and China and its allied countries continue to deepen. The last story is another diplomatic one, but arguably on the other side of the fence. President of the autonomous region of Bougainville in Papua New Guinea, Ismail Tarawama, has indicated he wants US support for progress towards reopening the Panguna mine, copper mine, as a key step towards Bougainvillean independence. In return, he has offered for Bougainville to host an American military base on its territory. The offer continues mounting fears of the militarization of the Pacific as competition between the US and China flares. These are the sorts of stories that may seem a little bit boring on the surface, the last 2 anyway, However, they are going to be increasingly important as new countries attempt to form after years of fights for independence in the Pacific, and those countries become valuable targets for both Chinese and American efforts to secure economic and military advantages in the theatre. So these are things that are very much well worth keeping in mind and tracking as time goes on. And that's the news for this episode. Before we move on to the interview with Mark Baxter, just a quick reminder that this show is sponsored by the Otago Socialist Society, and however you are listening to it, whether via terrestrial radio or online, you are doing so via Otago Access Radio 105.4 FM 1575 AM. So, with that done, how are we feeling today, Mark?
Good afternoon, viewers. Feeling fantastic. Lovely sunny Dunedin day.
Yes, it is a much better day than it has been for most of the year. So we'll start by way of introductions. Mark is a veteran of the student movement, particularly its 90s heyday, and also had a position as a member of staff with the Polytechnic Students Association for some years as well. While Mark has been largely retired from activism over the COVID period, he has quite a wealth of knowledge of the student movement of the last few decades. So I wanted to start just give us like a quick introduction to your experience with student politics.
So I was first a student in good old 1988, and we had a lovely Labour government. Yay! Wow! And so everything was good. We had nothing to complain about. And then that all come crashing down the very next year when the Labour Party introduced student fees, and fees went up from effectively $100, which you paid as your union fee, to $1,000, which was quite a lot of money in 1989. And for families that hadn't had a lifetime warning to save for their children's education, that was absolutely devastating class traitor horribleness. So that very quickly turned a large amount of students instantly opposed to having this huge fee, and massive marches of 8,000 people down George Street when the university probably only had about 10,000 on its rolls then, was sort of the peak of the student movement. I attended all of that because obviously I was badly affected by not being able to afford to go to university. But I sort of stayed on the periphery until the early 90s, when attention was focused on the universities themselves. So the following national government cunningly roped the universities in to pass on the underfunding to students. They're like, oh, we don't set fees anymore. We'll let each university set its own fee. So obviously we're like, oh, mean old university, we'll have to go and occupy them or something, which obviously had to be done, but was a good strategy initially for the government to deflect attention from it.
And you kind of, I guess, stuck around either at the periphery or being directly involved for some time with the student movement, at least as sufficiently that you were able to kind of keep an eye on what was happening over time. It
more or less took over my life from the mid-90s. I became heavily involved with the student action group, as it was called, which is the Sinn Féin to the to OUSA. Sorry, which is the IRA to the OUSA being Sinn Féin type relationship. And I got involved with general student politics as well. And yeah, it was still a great time to be involved with activism because students were still very, very annoyed and passionate about it.
Yeah, and you were also able to see not only that kind of heyday period, but also the decline of the student movement over the 2000s.
Very much. And it even probably started before that. Even towards the latter 90s, it was definitely fatigue amongst the regulars in the student protest movement. Some had obviously moved on by then, but I think on my last Students Association, you put your report for the year on what you did and blah, blah, blah. And I think the theme was like tiredness and disillusion on my last one as a general theme. Definitely battle fatigue.
Yes, yeah. And later on, you also had a position on staff with the Polytechnic Students Association as well.
Yes, I started there about 2000, and the student protest movement had very much lulled by then.
So I think something that a lot of the listeners will be interested in is kind of narrowing in on that late 80s, 90s heyday. And could you tell us a bit first about that initial late 80s period when things were starting to get really active all of a sudden?
Kind of. It was, I mean, the most telling thing is that you had 8,000 students turn up for a march when there was only 10,000 students in the city. That's a bigger participation rate than the massive anti-cuts to Dunedin's hospital march we just had. Like, people were truly passionate. And then there was all sorts of side things done as well, like bits of street theatre, all sorts of cool stuff. And then the not so cool. You may remember a protester being run over by a government official car, like intentionally, and all sorts.
Yeah, I was going to move on to that. So things got a bit more, maybe you say hectic, as the 1990s moved on. And one of the most well-remembered events was the COP riot, as it's been referred to, in, I think it was 1993. Were you there for that?
28th of September, off the top. Yes, I was there, and I was right on the stairs where the action happened. And calling it a police riot or violent fest would be a pretty accurate description of what happened. No one I saw fought the cops back, other than, trying to fend off blows from batons. And even when a lot of middle New Zealand, like a lot of the bad stuff wasn't seen on the television because it happened between the van and the cameras, but even what was seen, a lot of middle New Zealand were quite shocked that our police would act like that.
Yeah, I guess it's the sort of scenes that had cropped up a few times but hadn't really been regular since probably the 81 tour, I would imagine. Yes,
it probably would be analogy. It was the very same batons they brought out and newer riot gear, and definitely I'd never seen anything like that in Dunedin until that day. Like, you almost got the feeling that the cops had a lot of pent-up rage, like, yeah, let's crack some student.
So a little later on, probably I would say the most famous event of that period happened, which was a couple years later, the occupation of the clock tower. Were you around for that?
Yeah, so there were two occupations. One was a year or two later, and that was a smaller one, and they decided to concede early, and that's when I started to get more heavily involved with the student activist movement. The next one after that was the big long one, which is now famous. We stayed in registry for a whole week in the lead up to the election, and we're in one of the top news stories more days than not. So we really got the message out there, and it helped us deliver the sort of national aim of students' associations to make tertiary education an election issue. And as an indirect result of that, that's probably why we have interest-free on student debt now, which is a massive achievement.
Yeah. So, kind of narrowing in on that, the occupation itself, I've heard stories over time, I spent my time as a student as Otago, and I think it was 96, but you could correct me. But since that occupation, it's kind of gone into legend as part of, I guess, the lore of Otago University. I'm interested in kind of the logistics of it, keeping people fed and making sure stuff was getting in and out.
So it was largely aided by the fact, because the police were so violent in that 93 police riot, that the university, they suffered very badly in terms of public relations, and they were not keen to call the police in to shift us out. Like, that was it was not going to happen. that made things a bit easier for us. The university had its own private security, and that. So we worked with them. They worked out it was better PR for them to let us move stuff in and out rather than just barricade us in and shut the water and heating off and look like a bunch of. Ironically, I still have several friends now who were security guards back then. They were largely on our side, just quietly. But much of the legends of that are very much true. I can confirm or deny some if there's anything specific.
Yeah, the one that I remember hearing about a lot when I was a student was getting some of the food and supplies and whatnot by lowering baskets out of some of the windows.
So that was the initial approach before we'd worked it with security, but probably the most amusing. So we got in there, and we'd put weeks and weeks of planning into it, down to Otago activists were great at planning everything down to nth level detail, much more than you ever actually need. We got in there. And occupied the whole building. Everything went to absolute plan, and then we were like, "Heck, what do we do now? What are we going to do for food?" We just broke up into groups and gave each group a task and worked out at that point what we're doing. One of the more amusing stories is the first night. We had to rely on the Students Association for funding initially, and so we rung up the local fish and chip shop and said, "Could we have $100 of chips, please?" To which he just thought it was a crank call, obviously.
That probably wouldn't even get you very far these days.
Oh, not now. Back then, that would feed the 300 students who were in there. And that changed rapidly. Once we were on the TV, we got pizza companies donating 80 pizzas or something. We got donations from people all around the country. Some random pensioner on the West Coast saw it and sent a $20 check for food. So it had good community support.
Yeah, fantastic. So another thing that I find interesting is you said that you had a relationship with security. I'm also interested in what the relationship with staff and also the staff union was like.
So we did work somewhat with the union, and they did, as I recall, tell their staff to, hey, expect this confrontation. We have a common enemy here. Confrontation's not in your interest. Just, shut your workstation down and leave, which is largely what happened. I think there was one finance guy who was not keen to leave, but when 300 people storm into your office, even he conceded it was time to go.
So so you held the building for a full week. And once you get in there and you've kind of divvied up the tasks, what I'm interested in is was there stuff that you were doing while you were there? How did you keep yourself occupied when the basic tasks of the day were done?
So in the previous occupation, they held a dance party on the second night with exactly the intention of holding people's interest, but that was kind of counterintuitive. So things like that, there was less of things like that on the second, more successful occupation. People more made their own fun as well. There's some quite legendary stories of what happened in the Vice Chancellor's office, which are not suitable for daytime radio.
Yeah. So you kind of made entertainment for yourself for a week. Was there kind of, what might you call it? Kind of ironically, maybe tertiary organizing that was going on, kind of planning for what was going to come next once you had kind of made your point with the occupation.
Yes, but it was always part of a larger strategy to make tertiary education a major election issue, hence the timing of it. And it was coordinated through the national student body NZUSA, it was part of that election cycle's plan to achieve that. And it was planned that the Otago occupation, because our fee setting meeting come up first, it was hoped that the Otago one would spur on occupations at other campuses, which it did. I think Canterbury occupied the very next week and a couple of others after that.
Yeah, so I guess that brings me on to my next point where we're still focused on the 90s, which is I'm quite interested in your relationship to student activists on other campuses. Obviously, you had this kind of overall strategy through NZUSA, but I am also interested in just how much kind of contact and organising you were doing across campuses.
There was quite a lot in the initial 90s for sure. So NZUSA, so every students or most students associations run their own campaign wing, like the Education Action Group at Otago. All of them, apart from maybe Canterbury, had their students association managed through that. And that was all coordinated nationally through the National Students Association. Like part of NZUSA's national conference at the start of each year would be to sit all the student politicians down who are interested in campaigning, and you come up with that year's objectives and plans and so on. And most campus students associations employed someone at least part-time to deal with campaigns. And at the national office, there would be someone employed whose specific job was to coordinate them, certainly in election years and other years in the 90s. Sadly, that position's well gone now.
Yeah. So another thing I'm interested in is this is a pre-internet era that we're talking about. Well, not pre-internet, but kind of what you might call the mass internet era. And a lot of in terms of kind of getting your message out was done either through periodicals of various kinds or student radio. So I'm interested what your relationship with both the established student media and also any newsletters or anything that was being made by the activists themselves.
So it can be a mixed relationship. Obviously, the main campaign, because our target, other than students, was the public. So we used a lot of mainstream media, and any decent campus had a good working relationship with the newspaper journalists for education, the TV guys, and so on. But at a campus level, postering was the pre-digital thing. I mean, that's how I learnt to do digital design and layout, was through trying to make half-decent posters to get your message across. And so the relationship with the student newspaper at Otago was generally pretty good. It was generally progressive editors on Critic, but Critic took its role as a critic seriously. Like they wouldn't give the protest movement an easy ride. If we did something wrong, they'd certainly be on that. Student radio, it's probably a different relationship. We fought for poster space with them, almost literally.
Yeah, I mean, I also had my share of postering for events while I was a student as well, so it's one of those things that it was incredibly useful and necessary all the way back in, I don't know, 1789.
I swear I could do it in my sleep.
Remains useful to this day. So I guess I want to move on a little bit to that slightly later period. As things declined in terms of activity, was there a lot of demoralization, or was it kind of just exhaustion?
There was. There was definitely both, and exhaustion was a thing. We had a nice sort of mid-90s boost when the national government, well, it was actually New Zealand First, I think, one of the conservative right-wing governments tried to introduce voluntary student membership as a way of destroying the economic base of students' associations and thus destroying our ability to organise and get our message out there. And so the initial campaign, they let each individual association choose whether they wanted to be universal membership or voluntary membership. And most of the campuses won universal membership, so we could keep going as we did. So that was a bit of a high and a bit of a, yeah. But that was about the only energising thing. We didn't even realise we'd achieved interest-free for students until Labour panicked for a policy to get votes. And they're like, what's on the cards for vote winners. It's like, oh, this one's in the popular bin. Let's do that.
So, in sort of 1999, the long-standing national government, which had been limping for an entire term, was booted out. Helen Clark came in, was not the kind of, left-wing firebrand that some people would have hoped for, but did have the support of Anderton's alliance and seemed to be a step forward for a lot of people, especially those on the centre-left. When that happened and it became clear that there were going to at least be some minor concessions made to the student movement, what was the feeling among people who had been involved for a number of years now? By that point, should I say?
So most of them had moved on from Otago by then. So we've never sat down as a bunch of 90s activists and celebrated that we've saved New Zealand graduates millions and millions of dollars. We've never celebrated that.
The struggle marches on.
And so the Labour government was all right for students' associations. Like, they didn't attack us like National and ACT did. They left things very much as they were. And they were, obviously, the interest-free was a very good policy, because interest-free is very, very unequal. Like, it would end, if you pay interest on your student debt, because a nurse earns a lot less than a doctor, a nurse would end up paying a lot more in net cash for their degree than a doctor would, because the doctor could pay it off quickly and deal with that interest, whereas a nurse at the time, I think, was 40 years or something to pay it back, and obviously paying 8% interest over that's...
Yeah, an enormous burden to bear. So 2000s, things are a lot quieter, but there are some major protest movements that weren't necessarily on campus. Do you remember there being a lot of student support for, say, the anti-war movement in the early 2000s? Were there other movements that a lot of students were involved with?
Yes, but not so much a mass. Like, the days of the mass protests had sort of gone. There was still some big ones. Like, there was a really big, certainly anti-war march here in Dunedin, but that was obviously considerably mostly the public, and probably only engaged students would have got behind that. Even though I promoted it on tech, but no one was super excited.
So we're going to move forward a little bit, and you mentioned VSM before. Obviously, that bill does pass in 2009, I think, shortly into the key government. It's an ACT policy that is one of the ones that the key government gives as a concession for supporting that government.
It's an ACT branding policy. Like, there was no way that wasn't going to be part of their deal. I think it was 2012 when they finally pushed it through, and we sort of come within an ace of filibustering that to I think it only passed in the last parliamentary session of that term, and the ACT MP that put it up, I think, was retiring. I mean, someone else would have picked it up, obviously, but it's nearly. Yeah. And then it's really destroyed the voice of students since. You have no idea how between that and removing students off the councils that run universities and polytechs, both of those have been utterly devastating for student voice.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the next topic that I want to spend some time talking about is there have been, not really attempts, but there have been some people, yourself included, that have really pushed for VSM to be repealed. Do you have any idea why that's never really caught on as a popular policy, especially given the last maybe 5-ish years, students have been a little bit more active than they were before?
So I wouldn't necessarily say it's not a popular policy. Certainly, so I went and Waikato University held a referendum before referendums were forced on the other students' associations, because they'd gone voluntary themselves early on. And the students there, after 3 years of seeing all the things they lost, they were utterly annoyed with that and overwhelmingly voted for a universal membership back again. So it was, when students can see the effects, it's definitely a popular policy. However, give that 10 years later, and with half the stuff still quietly funded by universities or whatever, the gyms are still there, and students now don't really know what the choice is. Hence, it doesn't look a sexy policy. But I would maintain, if you laid out to students, here's the two realities, and you're now paying about $1,000 for these services, whereas when students run it, you paid $125. What would you choose?
And so there was... sorry, you go.
I blame Chris Hipkiss for ACT's voluntary membership of students' associations not being repealed. He absolutely sat on his hands, as far as I can tell, when he was Minister of Education and did nothing to repeal ACT policy.
Yeah, so that's something that I was going to bring up, is that we've had a two-term Labour government. We may well, depending on just how, aggrieved people are, wind up with another perhaps short Labour government in the next term or two. But what do you think is the chances, and what would the strategies be to get the VSM being repealed back on the menu for something that maybe not Labour, maybe it has to be a Greens or it's a Party Māori thing, kind of part of an agreement in the future. But what do you think it would take to get it back on the table?
It will become increasingly difficult, but for the smaller students' associations, most of those are gone already. Like VSM achieved its aim, not just of silencing them, but it's finished them. Most of them don't even exist now. So even if ACT's voluntary membership's repealed, it will still take 20 years to rebuild. So that's a long, hard slog. Some would argue to get that through Parliament, you'd need to find some kind of arrangement that National can live with and that Labour can live with. And so, like they have in the UK, for example, they still have universal membership in Britain, and the Tories there can live with the way that's set up. Like there's some opt-out clauses and blah, 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 and that much like we did do it here before ACT meddled with stuff.
And it is worth, I guess, remembering that the UK, I mean, the student movement isn't huge, but it's still, even proportionally, not just talking about, the raw numbers of there being more students, even proportionally, is much more active and has, a bit more social weight than here in New Zealand. I know it's going back a bit, but in the early 2010s, the student movement had some massive demonstrations and some quite militant ones in the UK.
No, absolutely. And they still exist, unlike in New Zealand. So the national student body is teetering on the edge of collapse, as I understand, and I believe so how students' associations have survived is they've done a deal to become service providers for the institution. So they'll tender to provide the services, and the institution will take the money off students and pay it to the Students' Association to provide services. That's at campuses that want to have a Students' Association. Some don't and say, nah, fend for yourselves. And I believe, I could have got the wrong end of the stick, but I believe Massey University is looking at defunding its Students' Association, which, if it doesn't weaken it, it will destroy it, obviously.
Yeah, and I believe that is the case. There's some people who are based in Palmerston North, I know, who have been relaying to me what's happening on the campus, and I do wonder how much that's a response to the demonstrations that happened last year on Massey, because there was a very active movement there for a little while, and the university was not happy with it.
Maybe. I don't know enough about their management to have a informed opinion. I guess also it's to do with Nationals and government, so maybe management want to suck up to National and ACT. I don't know. Yeah,
it could easily be a great number of different factors coming together.
Massey's a very odd place. I've been there once.
So one thing that we've kind of touched on and haven't really gone into yet is what you think the role of student politics in New Zealand is, and perhaps what it could be. I certainly think that students don't just have to be interested and active in their own interests, and even when they are, I think it has a lot more to do with national politics as a whole, rather than just kind of one niche sectional interest.
Well, I mean, that's a key part of the role of students' associations is, as a student, I don't have to care about fighting the council to get late opening for the pubs or whatever, because my students' association who represents me is going to represent my interests. And while students' associations have a lot of roles like providing services, sports, clubs, all sorts, the fundamentally important service for me they provide is advocating and a voice for students. No one else in the world is going to do that for students. No one's going to stand up for students other than students' associations.
Yeah, for sure.
And old hacks like me.
Yeah. And on top of that, you also have, there are interests that students have that are also the interests of other parts of society. I mean, students being able to make, if, we kind of have a counterfactual or a theoretical and the student movement is quite strong and bolshy again, students being able to reduce fees and make things cheaper and change education policy, that has a big flow-on effect. It means that, working class families can more reasonably send their kids off to university if they say want again.
Absolutely. And also it means there's someone there to cross-coordinate campaigns. Like, there's nothing worse than being played off education versus healthcare. We were played off like that in the early 90s till we got together and we said, hey, we have a common enemy in of government underfunding. Let's work together to so each other's campaigns work with each other to fight that common enemy. And likewise with staff, we were divided by staff at university fee-setting meetings. They go, well, we can not put your fees up, but the staff won't get their pay rise. And that kind of worked till we got smart. And it's like, hey, we better talk to the to the staff union. And we both know we're being bought off. And if there's bodies to coordinate that and let their members know, hey, this is a silly, factious argument. We're standing united together. And that was great. That led up to things like that 96 occupation.
Yeah, for sure. And in the kind of, I guess, aftermath of the VSM passing, and not only was the student movement much quieter, but also it was now, as you said before, its economic base was kind of structurally undermined.
And that was the deliberate intention of voluntary membership.
A lot of that kind of, I guess you call it institutional kind of social movement memory has faded away. A lot of students, the vast majority of students now, there might be a few old hands who have gone back to study after some years, but most of them won't remember and won't have the institutional memory from their association to remember exactly how much they could win if there was the organisation to try.
Yeah, like I said earlier, if you can't see a tangible thing, it's not clear what you've lost, and that is sadly going to be the difficulty in repealing ex-VSM now. Yeah.
The other thing that you've kind of put in my mind is that there are cases, even to this day, and we might touch on this a bit later if we have the time, is, if you think about the hospital protest, one thing that was great about it, among many other things that was, quite impressive about it, was all of the different medical student associations were all there en masse. And that's probably the first time that's happened in quite a while. That's something like that, where one of the, not OUSA itself, although I think it endorsed it too, but the...
Hard to tell with OUSA. Since voluntary membership's become a thing, when did you last see a student president criticising a fee increase in the newspaper?
Yeah, of course.
Not because they have to beg to the university for their money, so they're not going to criticise when the university does things that are not in students' interests. And in terms of the protest movement, that was highlighted for me when a more conservative OUSA president didn't come to a nationally organised protest against fee increases in Dunedin because he was organising the Hyde Street keg party was his excuse.
Yeah, very important right there.
He was muzzled. Like he did say, I can't have an opinion on this until after I've spoken to the university. It's like, what? You're a student advocate. You don't ask the university what your opinion is. That's missing the entire point of being a student advocate.
Yeah. And I think that's part of why I brought up the hospital protest, because it wasn't OUSA per se, but it was like the Medical Students Association, the Māori Medical Students Association, who could see very obviously they have a clear interest in the hospital getting built as is, because this is a major training ground for med students, and a hell of a lot of the a huge proportion of the workers who will go on to be vital to the health sector. So that there is a very clear point there where the interests of tertiary education and the interests of the health sector, they're one and the same. And especially in this city right now.
Absolutely. Hence, it's pleasing to see former student association and people involved at higher levels with health decisions. So the Labour's Minister of Health was a student politician. The guy who, I think he's president of the doctors, young doctor, I can't remember, they're young now. He was from our Medical Students Association here, and hey, super props to us for...
So I guess the last point in talking about the kind of student movement is I want to get your thoughts a little bit on just the tertiary education system in New Zealand in general, because part of having a strong, bolshy, ready to go, well-organised student movement is precisely to be able to impact the policies of the Education Ministry. And I would like to get your thoughts as someone who has had this kind of connection to the tertiary education system for so long, as to the direction that tertiary education has been heading over the last kind of 2 decades, I suppose.
Bad.
I should have expected that.
There's many things I lament at where it's gone. Obviously, I hate the user pays aspect to it. Like, I'm glad we got some limits on that, but it's still a user pays model, and it's still now become the accepted culture in the country that you're expected to pay something for. When I grew up, was something that should be provided by the state. So even a drain layer from the West Coast children would have a chance at becoming a doctor. It's sad that we've lost that. It's sad that critical thinking is no longer part of a university degree, which university degrees are now more what would have been polytechnic training. They'd train for jobs. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not critical thinking, and we need more of that. And in the more recent future, I don't understand Chris Hipkins' mega polytech model. It looks to me just like something that he, as a student politician, would have joined us as opposing when National had exactly such kind of policies in the 90s. What do I know? I don't know enough about it to criticise it outright, but it just seems like let's sack a whole lot of people and we'll lose a lot of local say and autonomy so we can run it like a one big company with a corporate office.
So I think that brings us to the end of that discussion. We do have a couple minutes, so I'm aware that you haven't been very involved in activist politics since COVID has broke out worldwide, but I am, just from the perspective of someone who has done their time in the trenches, so to speak, kind of your thoughts on the hospital protest in particular, because say what you will about it, 35,000 people in a city like Dunedin, that is just an enormous achievement. That's not just kind of a sectional, as you brought up before, 8,000 out of a university of 10,000 students is an enormous achievement, but it is kind of sectional and tied to one part of one constituent part, an important one, but one constituent part of the city. But getting out 35,000 people in a city that has 130-ish thousand students included.
That's a massive achievement. I didn't at all mean to downplay that by our one-off fantastic student turnout. Yeah. No, I think I hope it can keep its momentum up, but I think it's largely gone very well. Like, there were quite a number of Conservative and National voters not just bad-mouthing the hospital cuts, but in that march. And when they turn up to say, hey, an inadequate hospital is not good enough, I would hope that National have paused to at least throw us some bones.
And I think it is important to remember that it's kind of irrelevant what political persuasion you are, if the hospital is not up to scratch, and it doesn't matter if
absolutely. This is my daily task now, is reminding people. I'm not a troll, but a Facebook person who speaks their opinion when I should be more polite. And often I'll be promoting hospital stuff. And it's, but Labor made cuts too. And I'm like, yes, they've both made us cuts, but it doesn't matter what side you vote here. This is, if we want an adequate hospital, this is something we need to be absolutely united on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the point I was getting to was, if you're working class and can't afford private healthcare, if you have any kind of medical event or pre-existing condition that might mean that you have to go to the public hospital as fast as possible.
Preaching to the choir. During the last National Act government, I literally died because our hospital was underfunded. Literally died because it was underfunded.
Hey, it's great that you're still here, and a testament, I should say, to the quality of the staff at the hospital, even in trying times.
Absolutely, the staff were fabulous. It's just a shame they didn't have someone to give me the life-saving operation I needed after 5 o'clock, and so they just bumped me to the wards to see if I survived the night, literally.
So, it's something that's very tied into our topic today, which is, there is a almost inherent connection between the tertiary education system and a myriad of other causes and systems on which we rely, all up and down the country. So I think that's one of the things to take home from this. We are getting towards the end of the show, so we do have a couple of my regular reviews, as well as one event to promote before ending things off. Before I get into that, I would like to remind people that this show is sponsored by the Otago Socialist Society, and it is hosted, wherever you're listening to it, by Otago Access Radio 105.4 FM 1575 AM. We'll give a final kind of word to Mark once I get through the reviews, and then I will have one event to promote before we sign out. So, going back to my usual pattern of reviews, I have one free slot and one slot that is for a local/New Zealand piece of media. So my New Zealand piece of media this time around is the 2023 album by Christchurch band Model Home. The album is called And Nobody Made a Sound. Fantastic little piece of, I would say, emo-tinged indie rock. It is a very lovely listen. There is some pretty cutting social commentary on the album, which makes it very fitting for a show like this. And it is something that, it's not a style that I usually go out of my way to listen to, but it is one of those pieces of music that it just kind of doesn't matter. It is a fantastic album. And I'm not just saying that because the band includes some members of the society up in Christchurch. I'm saying that out of a genuine love of music as well. I just want to make that clear. This is just a great little piece of Kiwiana music. It's a style that I don't normally listen to very much, but it is an album that I highly recommend. I don't have much more to say on it beyond I'm particularly impressed by some of the vocal work on the album. Some of the both backing and lead vocal work is just spectacular for that style of music. And huge props to the band for putting that one out last year. It's their debut album, so worth picking up if you see it anywhere, or if you are give it a listen, and you really want to have that physical copy. So once again, that is And Nobody Made a Sound, the 2023 debut album of Model Home. My second review, because we are getting to the end of the year, is the 1974 album Black Christmas. It is probably, I would say, it's hands down the best Christmas horror movie ever made, but I would actually say that it is in the, maybe not the best horror movie ever made, but it is in that kind of tier, if you want to think of it that way. It is a proto-slasher movie with some very heavy social commentary on particularly gender and crime. It is not only a very interesting movie that has a lot to say about topics such as women's liberation and abortion politics, but it is also, on top of that, just a fantastic entry into the kind of pre-slasher era. It's sometimes called a proto-slasher film of, I think it was released the same year as Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is another favorite of mine, and another hugely influential film on what would become one of the dominant genres of the 1980s, especially in the horror field. But it is a great album. It is very much a a great movie, very much a mood movie as well. There is not only is the unnamed for most of the film, but I believe identified as Billy, bad guy, not only one of the more unnerving characters in the horror world, especially because you barely see this character for the entire film. He is more of a presence and a threat than an actual character. It is also one of those films that expertly threads the needle of having this strong, powerful social commentary, but also a very strong aesthetic quality that you can enjoy on its own terms as well. So yeah, my second review, just because we are getting towards the end of the year, is a movie called Black Christmas. If you are looking for something seasonally appropriate, but you're a bit sick of your classic Christmas story films and your Mariah Carey, and you want something to just, change the mood a little bit and have a bit of a change up, then that is, especially if you're a horror fan, that is a very strong recommendation from me. Lastly, on the docket, we have the event I have to advertise before we get back to Mark for the final word and we close out. So there is one society event for me to advertise. That is on Saturday, the 23rd of November. The Otago Socialist Society will be hosting a series of events in the afternoon in South Dunedin. These will begin with a public discussion on the topic of Why Are We Socialists?, in which members of the society will give short presentations to the question. This will be followed after a half-hour break by our annual general meeting, to which anyone who joins as a full member will have full voting rights, even if they join on the day. After another break, we'll be heading to the pub for the monthly social drinks. So the exact details are a 1:30 p.m. start for the public discussion that will be at the Dunedin South Labour Rooms at 68 McAndrew Road. The subsequent AGM will be in the same venue and will start around 2:30 p.m, or at the very least the break between will have started by then, so it would be around that time you'd be wanting to arrive. And lastly, at 5 p.m, after everything is packed down, the social drinks will be across the road at the Rope and Twine from 5 p.m, and between each event there will be some catering provided with both food and refreshments. People are welcome to attend just one of the constituent events, or two if they cannot make all three. So once again, the exact details there are 1:30 p.m, we have Why Are We Socialists?, a broad discussion on the topic from the members of our society with some very short presentations to that topic by members of our society. And that is once again at the Dunedin South Labour Rooms, which is 68 McAndrew Road in South Dunedin. At 2:30 p.m, we are encouraging people to arrive for our annual general meeting. That is in the same venue. the Dunedin South Labour Rooms, 68 McAndrew Road. And around that time, kind of in between the two, we will have some refreshments provided and some food provided for people who attend. And then finally, after the AGM has concluded and we've had another little period for refreshments, for some food, to pack down everything, give people a chance to go away and get things done if they need, at 5 p.m. and from that point onward, for probably a couple of hours at least, we will be at the Rope and Twine, which is 67 McAndrew Road, right across the street, for our social drinks. So if any of those interest you, just, roll back a little bit, have a listen to those exact details, and also we will have those details available on both our Facebook and Instagram accounts. I'm going to throw back to Mark for one last, just a thank you for coming on. Great little discussion we had, and if you have a final thought that you want to end with, go ahead.
Hey, a pleasure. Look, I'll give my review. If people like some music with a bit of bite to it, check out a famous or infamous Kiwi punk band from the 80s called No Idea. Their album Class War, absolute banger, still just as relevant today, sadly, as it was back then. And don't forget, look up Otago Socialist Society on Facebook.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. All right, so that is the show, not only for this month, but also for the year. We are going to be back next year. So, we're not going away. We're just taking a break for the summer. We'll be back probably January, if not February next year. And we will have hopefully just as much, if not more, to discuss and share with you when that happens. So go ahead and follow both the Otago Socialist Society and Otago Access Radio on both Facebook and Instagram, where you can find both of those. And just a quick, have a good summer, have a good Christmas break to all of the people listening in. Noho ora mai, you'll be hearing from me next year.
The weight sucks stronger by the year. The weight sucks stronger by the year. The weight sucks stronger by the year. The answer's never clear. You walk upon the sphere. Keep walking.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.